The AAC Report is brought to you by Blake Blahut of Realty One Group. Whether you're looking to buy your very first home or looking to downsize or upgrade, call Blake Blahut anytime at 407-748-0484. Welcome to the AAC Report, only on the Knightline Sports Network. I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for joining me. Coming up on today's show, we begin our team-by-team previews for the 2019 football season. Coming up, Joe Miller from the Navy Radio Network will join us to talk about the Midshipmen, as well as Sam and Dustin from the Scott Holman Pawdcast to look at the Houston Cougars. But first, we will look at a team soon to be departed from the conference. Joining us now is Alex Putterman. He covers UConn football for the Hartford Courant as the Huskies engage on their final season in the American in 2019. Alex, thanks for taking the time.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And so the last season in the American, I guess first let's go back to media days. Was there a lot of tension there with UConn and the AAC powers that be?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. One of our photographers got this great shot of UConn athletic director David Benedict and Mike Oresco kind of side by side with their hands on each other, and it looked like they were smiling and everything. So they weren't about to fight or anything like that. But I'm sure that was slightly awkward for everyone involved, and Randy Edsall certainly wasn't in any rush to talk about the conference stuff. So yeah, that was certainly an interesting day.
And so now it basically is official, $17 million, the closing price for UConn to exit the AAC and join the Big East. We are also hearing that the AAC wanted more than that, even $30 million being floated out there. Is that accurate at all?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I know that, it said $10 million in the bylaws, but UConn wanted to get out, long before the 27-month period by which they were supposed to give notice. So, I'm sure the negotiations went back and forth. I don't know what the AAC originally wanted, but they settled on $17 million, which will be paid out over the course of a few years, about 8 years. So it'll be kind of defrayed a little bit. And UConn agreed to schedule basketball home and home with AAC teams. So that was I guess a resolution that left everybody satisfied.
So now Randy Edsall does have an interesting job ahead of him going into this final season of the American. What do you think his mindset is going to be? He certainly didn't want to talk about it much at media days, but how does he approach this season?
Well, he had an interesting job, I think, even before all of this started. Obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, UConn was one of the worst teams in the whole country last year and had one of the worst defenses of all time. And there's no real guarantee that they are going to be all that much better this coming season. So, Randy has said that he's totally focused on the coming season, totally focused on the opener against Wagner on August 29th. I do kind of believe him for the simple reason that he's got enough to worry about even without stressing scheduling and how to recruit as an independent and all of that stuff. Because, the on-field situation certainly requires his attention as well.
And you mentioned last season having one of the worst defenses. They were very young on that side of the ball. Does having that year of experience help them at all coming into this season?
Yeah. I would think it sort of has to. They were one of the least experienced teams in the country last year. Some games they started as many as 8 freshmen on defense, which, you're going to take some lumps when you're starting 8 freshmen on defense. So I do think that some of those freshmen turn into sophomores, a full off season in the weight room. They've got some experience behind them. They can be better. The question will be, the offense is losing probably its best player, quarterback David Pindell. So the question will be whether the offense can kind of support what might be a regular bad defense instead of a historically bad defense.
And you mentioned Pindell is now out of the picture. So who steps up and takes the role as the starting quarterback for the Huskies?
Well, we don't know for sure. I would say that the favorite is this guy, Mike Beaudry, who is a graduate transfer from a Division II school, West Florida.
Yeah, he's actually from Orlando at Haggerty High School. So,
is that right?
Yeah, so he is.
Okay.
So Central Florida fans will be familiar with him.
It's hard to know what we're getting with him because he hasn't played at the Division I level. In fact, he only played one full season at the Division II level. It was an impressive season, and he took his team to the Division II championship game, but then he was hurt last season. So that's kind of a question mark, but I think he's probably the favorite. There's a redshirt freshman named Stephen Krajewski. There's a transfer from North Carolina State. He was a walk-on at North Carolina State, but he's on scholarship at UConn. His name is Michael Leon. So there should be some competition over the next month for that position.
And your quarterback is going to be as good as your offensive line and your playmakers around you. Does UConn have some support for him in those areas?
Mixed bag, I would say. The offensive line returns 4 starters. I would expect that to be kind of a strength. It was somewhat of a strength last year, and with 4 returning starters, it should be good again. Running back is a strength. Kevin Mensa rushed for 1,000 yards last year. He's back, and they got a transfer from Toledo named Art Tompkins, who has potential to also be kind of a difference-making running back. The issue comes at receiver and tight end. They lost something like their top 6 pass catchers from last year, and had some guys transfer and some guys graduate, and the big question mark who will even play at receiver and tight end, let alone whether any of those guys can be real difference makers. So I would say that it should probably be a more run-heavy team than we've seen in the recent past at UConn. But so there are some good and some bad on offense, I would say.
Well, this is a team that only gained a single victory a year ago and was winless in the conference. Do you think they make any strides at all upon that?
It's hard to be much worse than they were last year, you know? I've seen over-unders from odds makers at 2.5 wins. That seems about right. I guess, I would say, 2 or 3 wins. They should win their opener against Wagner, and then they're winnable games. As for whether they win any in conference, I don't think they'll be the favorite for in any conference game. You never know when you pick off an upset here and there. So it'd be hard to be as bad as they were last year and as overmatched as they were last year. So I guess not that this is like a ringing endorsement, but I would say they almost have to be better.
So obviously, Brady Etzel's not going to concentrate on the future beyond this season, but where do you see UConn football happening? Will they be independent? Will they find a way to join another conference, or will the program survive? You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so they announced the other day that they'll be independent in the short term, and they've been really adamant that they're not getting rid of football. They're not dropping football down to the FCS level, as some people have advocated. So the plan is to go the independent route. And, other schools have found some success with that. I wrote a story the other day, spoke to the athletic director at UMass about how they've kind of made things work as an independent in sort of a similar geographic area to UConn, kind of a similar stature in the football world maybe, although UConn fans might not like me saying that. And so I think that there are some possibilities with independence. The fans seem somewhat excited about the idea of having a more local schedule, regularly playing teams from the Northeast or kind of traditional rivals of UConn. So I think generally there's some optimism that independence won't be a disaster and that it could work out okay.
So the one question I'm going to ask every guest that I have on to preview the respective teams in the American this season is, who do you think will win the conference? Do you think UCF can repeat, or does somebody else get another shot at it?
It's funny, UConn is so far from the top of the AAC that I barely even pay attention to what's going on up there. But no, I think you've got to give UCF the benefit of the doubt there. All the talent they bring back, I know they've lost some key guys, but with all the talent they bring back and just the fact that they've kind of dominated the league for 2 years in a row, it would feel almost foolish to pick somebody else. I'll believe that they've been displaced as the best team in the conference when I actually see it.
All right, that's Alex Putterman. He's with the Hartford Courant covering UConn football. We certainly appreciate your time in joining our podcast.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And we'll take a look at Navy and Houston when the AAC report continues in just a moment. Are you tired of the endless money pit of paying rent? Do you have a home you need to sell for top dollar? Talk to the Hometown Advantage award-winning real estate professional and fellow UCF Knight, Blake Blahut of Realty One Group. Blake has proven to produce results and a smooth process for his clients all across Central Florida. Whether you're looking to buy your very first home or looking to downsize or upgrade, talk to Blake Blahut. Visit him at his website, blakesorlandohomes.com, or contact him anytime at 407-748-0484. Again, blakesorlandohomes.com and 407-748-0484. Get the hometown advantage by working with Blake. Time now to look at the Midshipmen of Navy for the 2019 season. Joe Miller, the Navy Radio Network, is here to do just that. Joe, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, no problem. Glad to talk about the Mids and glad to talk about AAC football.
Yes, as we get ready to embark on another football season. And Navy's had a lot of great success under Coach Ken Niumatalolo, but the last couple of seasons have been a bit of a backslide. So what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. It's funny. I was talking to somebody else about this the other day, and when you're in the vacuum of being around the team all the time, sort of got to step out of it and look at it sometimes from the big picture, because inside there were so many close games over the last when you look at the back half of 2 years ago and into last season, and you sometimes look at it from the coach and you say, to make a play there, here or there, then things change a lot. But I think there's a little bit of everything that goes along with it. I mean, injuries. I think the instability at the quarterback position probably has had a big part of that as well. When you look at what they had for when Keenan Reynolds was there, they basically had him starting for 3.5 years without really much injury concern there. I mean, there was a couple times that he missed a couple games here and there, but there was no long-term injuries. And then since then, you really had a hard time finding a quarterback that could go a 4 or 5 game stretch without getting a little bit nicked up at times. And I think that's hurt them offensively. And I think they went through an identification process on the offensive side of the field and said, look, we have a certain group of players that we think can that can have success one way, and maybe we changed the offense a little bit too much. And I think they've gone back this offseason and kind of reassessed what they want to do offensively. So it's a lot of small things, but I think they need to figure out that stability of the quarterback position, especially get things going on the offensive side. They bring in a new defensive coordinator that I think will help a lot on the defensive side to sort of hone in on an identity there. And look, I don't think there's any doubt that the move into a conference, you move in the AAC, that the talent level has stepped up in the conference as well. And I think that's a big part of it as well. I think the conference has gotten better over the last couple of years, and I think that's a part of it as well.
You mentioned the instability at quarterback. It was kind of a rotation last year. Malcolm Perry, of course, he played at 3 different positions last season, including the quarterback position, and certainly one of the most dynamic athletes in college football. Will they be settling upon him this season?
Yeah, I mean, that's the plan going into the season. That it's Malcolm's job. They don't want to tinker with it right now. And I don't expect them, unless there's an injury, to tinker with it throughout the season. I mean, I think they're committed to him. I think they love what he can do as far as in the running attack. And, ironically enough, his first 2 starts in both those games, he had huge rushing days. And I think they got they looked at those and said, well, here are a couple things that he did well in these games that I think we can take throughout the rest of the next season. And things didn't work out well. Teams game planned against them and struggled at times last year. But I think they're committed to him at the quarterback spot. There's no doubt about that going into the season. There's really not even a competition. It's more of a competition to find the backup for this team and maybe fill out the rest of the depth chart there. So I think they're comfortable with Malcolm. They've made some adjustments this offseason. I think that they're very hopeful that first they want him to obviously stay healthy and be able to play the entire season at the quarterback spot. But there is a little bit of a I think an excitement level. They don't want to get too carried away, but I think they think that they're on the right track with Malcolm at quarterback, and obviously we'll find out as the season progresses.
And Navy forever has run the triple option. So what makes this such a complex offense to execute?
Well, I think it's a couple of factors. And one of the things that they've looked at this season is probably more than anything, they've reassessed things and trying to go back to be a little bit more basic in the triple option. They ran a lot of read option stuff over the last year and a half with Malcolm at quarterback, get him in the shotgun to take advantage of some of the things that they thought he could do while in that shotgun. So I think they've gone back to a little bit more of the basics of the triple option. I mean, at its core, when you look at the success that it's had, the thing that makes it, as some, death by 1,000 paper cuts is its efficiency and effective, getting 4 yards almost every carry. Look, you're gonna fool some people in the passing game, and you're gonna get some big plays every now and then. But when they were running it at their best, I think you look at what they were able to do on third down a couple years ago. They were almost 55% on third down. And a lot of those situations, they would get into those third down and 3, and they knew they could get 4 yards. That's at its core what it makes, what makes it so special is that the known quantity of getting 3 or 4 yards, you don't have a lot of negative plays. If you hold on to the football, you can have some success. So I really think they're trying to get back to running a lot more triple option than they have in the past, where it was a lot of two-man option or some read option out of the shotgun. So I think they've tried to go back to a little bit more triple option to get the best out of that by going back to some of their basic stuff that maybe they've gone away from the last couple of years.
And the triple option is also very tough for defenses to prepare for. And I've heard it often said that the teams that have to play against Navy and Army, it's like it messes them up for 2 weeks, not just for the game they're playing against that team, but for the week after.
Yeah, it's one of those stats. I know, obviously, we play Notre Dame every year, and I don't know what the stat is right now, but there's a couple times they talked about sort of the effect for Notre Dame the week after playing Navy, and then we've seen it in the conference play as well. And it's a unique offense. Obviously, teams don't see it all the time. Defensively, it's tough to prepare for on a week's notice. But we obviously throughout the season we talk to the opposing coaches a lot, in our pregame stuff and lead up to the game and stuff. It's always interesting to me. Almost every coach at some point says, we prepared a little bit for it either in the spring or in the fall camp before you get to the preparation the week before. So, a lot of teams like to dabble in it. Of course, the thing for Navy has been, well, if you dabble in it defensively, we want to be the experts in it so that we know what we see every time is not that different from teams going up against us. So they try to hone in on what defenses do and sort of have a scenario to combat each and every alignment that defenses throw at them. So, look, it's not easy for opposing coaches, and we see the effect of that in not only in the games per se, but also in the weeks preceding that, how the offense can sort of have a lasting effect on the opposition.
Who else do you expect to step up on the offensive side of the ball besides Perry?
Well, I think you look at the running attack is going to be huge as always. And Nelson Smith at fullback, the B-back, as people talk in the Navy offense, the guy that lines up directly behind the quarterback. I think he has a couple qualities at that position that we haven't seen a ton from as far as the speed. He has a nice power-speed mix, and he's going to be expected to carry the load from that position at the B-back. So I think you look at him as a guy that it's really interesting because you look at the last couple of years, it's been a quarterback-heavy offense. So Malcolm, and along with Zach Abey, who's at quarterback, and Garrett Lewis, so they were on average carrying the ball 30 times a game. If you look back 10, 12 years ago at this offense, same coordinators, same coaches here, the primary guy carrying the ball was the fullback, who's carrying the ball, 18 to 25 times a game. So I don't foresee that, but Nelson Smith has got the potential to be a big-time running back. The other guy that's going to be interesting for me to watch, because he really came onto the scene a couple years ago and had a huge game against Notre Dame, was Keone Cordell Makakau, a young man out of Hawaii. He was banged up last year, had a bunch of injuries. If he can be healthy, he's got the talent from the slot back position to make some plays. So I think he's a guy to watch this season. If he's healthy, I think he can make a big impact on their ground attack. But they need Nelson Smith, their fullback, to have a big year, to be healthy and be ready to go for the beginning of the season. And I think he could be a factor. They also, they don't throw it a ton, but they do like their wide receivers a lot. They were young there. Those guys to make some plays as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned also that there's going to be a change on the defensive side of the ball. According to Dale Pearson, retired after more than 2 decades. Kennesaw State's Brian Newberry is brought in. What will change on the defensive side of the ball for the Midshipmen?
Yeah, good question. That's the thing. I'm most interested in. Practice starts on Friday, and we'll see what they do defensively. They've been, I think every time you hear a defensive coordinator hired across college football, you talk about, you hear sort of the similar things. We want to be more of an attacking defense, but they need to be a team that can get some more pressure on the quarterback. One of the things that we talk with the Navy fan base, and probably most every fan base in America, wants your defensive coordinator to blitz more, be more aggressive, and to sort of have that mentality. And I think there's a lot of people that expect that from them this year, to be a little bit more aggressive. I wouldn't expect a formation shift. They've been at the 3-4. I think they think that's the way that they can go going forward. The one thing that's going to be interesting to me is, and we'll see how it plays out this season, in this conference, as you know, when you're taking on teams, you're like or like Memphis, especially Memphis, who plays their wide receivers, at the hash marks and 4 guys out there inside the spread the field, like a lot of teams in the AAC. One of the things they always kind of struggled with was getting 4 cornerbacks on the field, because they were always reluctant to put 4 guys out there. So I will see in those, it'll be interesting to see from my perspective, in those passing situations, they really, a lot of times, like to stay in their 3-4 and maybe only bring 1 extra defensive back on. They go to more of a traditional nickel or dime look on defense in those passing situations. One of the things I'll be watching out for, especially early this season. And
the book on Newberry at Kennesaw State too was that they were very good in pass defense.
Yeah. You look at his numbers last year; they were fantastic. You have to obviously a different level, but they were able to get a ton of turnovers. They were able to get pressure on the quarterback, and I think you look at those passing numbers, and I think they were top 15 in a lot of those categories. So he put up some big numbers last year when you look at team defensive numbers at Kennesaw State. So I think that's a good sign for them. And I think, look, one of the things that Navy's talked about a ton is that the lack of turnover in the coaching staff over the last, leading up to the last 7 or 8 years. And you have some turnover this year. So you got some new guys in there, and you got some different ideas. And I think a lot of people are excited to see how that plays out on the field, and to see what different things this Navy defense can do. Because, look, in this conference, you got to stop some people every now and then. And it has been an issue for them, especially last season at times. And, look, the number one thing that they've talked about a ton is getting off the field on 3rd down. It's been their biggest issue the last couple of years, is getting off the field on 3rd down. That number, it's been something that's been ingrained into when we talk about this team, and statistically, and what they need to do to get up to improve. And that opposing 3rd down conversion rate has to get better for this team to have more success.
So tell me a little bit more about Coach Ken. He's been there a long time. He's a great individual, and he has to be a special coach to be successful. And to me, it takes an even more special guy to do that at a service academy.
Yeah, the thing that I will say most about him is he's a quiet guy, but he is an intense guy, especially on game day. and he's incredibly competitive, as you would find most college coaches, I think, is out there. But the thing, there's a switch that turns on game day. You can see the intensity in his eyes, and competitive guy. A lot of times he'll talk about, he's into boxing, and he'll talk about that mindset and that demeanor that it takes to get into a ring. And I think he has. I just think he's an incredibly intense guy who, on game day, can turn it on, and he's a competitive guy and a guy that is also very much a family-oriented guy. His program is about family, and you can see that in him as well. So it's almost like you talk about a lot with the duality of an individual, that you have this one guy that is family-oriented, very religious on one end, but on game day kind of turns into a very highly competitive person that wants to win, and it really shows out on the field.
So, Joe, I'm asking everybody that I have on to do a preview of their team to kind of handicap the conference. Who do you see taking the conference title this season?
Well, I mean, obviously, you look at UCF and Cincinnati last year. We played both of those teams that were, our crossover games in the East last year with UCF and with Cincinnati. And obviously, I was really impressed with Cincinnati. Young quarterback, very good depth at the running attack. You got Michael Warren coming back. You got Ritter back at quarterback. I think they're going to be a really good team now. They lose some guys on the defensive line. That's going to hurt them. So I kind of like them. Nothing against UCF. I kind of like them in the East this season. I want to see how the quarterback situation with the Golden Knights play out. But I do like Cincinnati in the East right now. In the West, when you look at Houston and you look at Memphis, Navy last year, it was kind of crazy schedule early in the season. They play at Hawaii, they come back home in a short week, and they beat Memphis early in the season. I think you look at the West, and those are two of the teams that pop out. I think Houston is actually the favorite, assuming that Derek King is healthy and he's ready to go this season for Houston. I think that offense can be prolific. So I kind of lean towards Cincinnati in the East, which is probably not what most people expect. And I like Houston in the West right now.
Well, we'll try to have the UCF audience not hit you too bad on that prediction. So obviously, Army is the arch rival, and there's been a little talk of maybe could Army become part of the AAC. Do you think would be a beneficial move to Army or for the conference?
I think I asked about this the other week. The one thing that I think anytime I've talked to anybody associated with Army, they really don't seem that interested in moving into a conference. Now they just hired a new athletic director, so you never know where you could go with that. I mean, you would have to sort of maneuver around the Army-Navy game, which I think for a lot of people associated with the game, it would be difficult. I think the way that they've had the success that they've had over the last couple of years, look, I think they could transition like Navy could into the AAC. When UConn left, you looked at the options out there, and I think certainly Army is one of those options, but I don't get the sense, to be quite honest with you, that they see it as an opportunity that they want to go after right now. They had experience in the Conference USA right around the early 2000s. It didn't go well for them, and they're at the point where they're winning. Now, a lot of people have taken shots at their schedule. It hasn't been the best in the country. There's no doubt about that. But they're winning. They beat Air Force. They beat Navy last year. I think they're pretty content on where they're at right now. So I don't know if they're that interested in coming to the AAC. It's certainly a name that's out there, but maybe it's one of those things that they, maybe a year or two down the line, they might be more willing to look at it, but it doesn't seem that they're that interested right now in moving to a conference.
Yeah, and when they first came up as a potential, the very first thing I thought of was the Army-Navy game. You can't really mess with that showcase game in December, can you? I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's one of those logistical things that you look at and you kind of wonder how they would have to reimagine things. And look, a couple years ago when Navy, there was a possibility if Navy had beaten Houston in the last weekend of the season, and Navy would have gone into that Army-Navy game with the outright AAC, champion. Excuse me, after they won the West and they played Temple a couple years ago in the AAC championship game. There was a lot of wondering if Navy had won that game and would have been the Power 5 team. Would the playoff committee wait to the conclusion of the Army-Navy game to award Navy that bowl? So it's complicated because they play the week after, and it's sort of at the same time as they announce the bowl schedule. So you would have to maneuver it around. And I know from the Navy perspective, they love the fact that it's a standalone game. I think obviously Army loves the fact that it's a standalone game, sort of tucked into the perfect part of the schedule. And look, the television ratings the last couple of years, CBS has liked it in that spot as well because they've done a really good number the last couple of years. So I think that would be a stumbling block, and they would have to sort of figure out that element. Of course, if you go back to the conference model with Army, would the conference be okay with that being? We have this crossover games with the East and the West. Obviously, that might go away. But if they put them in separate conferences, would the conference be okay with Navy having one of the same team each year? And then if you put them in conference play and they're both vying for the conference title, how do you manage that at the end of the season? So there would be a lot to work through if that was the case.
No doubt about it. Well, Joe Miller, I would have to ask you. You have to give me a Go Navy beat Army, right?
Yeah, no problem with that, Jeff. Go Navy, beat Army.
All right, Joe Miller of the Navy Radio Network, thank you so much for giving us a preview of the Midshipmen for 2019.
No problem. And sorry about that Cincy pick.
We will forgive you, especially if UCF comes through. And now we head to Houston. Sam and Dustin of the Scott and Holman Podcast join us to talk about the Cougars for 2019. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having us on.
Hey, so, Scott Street and Holman Street, for those who are not familiar with H-Town, intersect at the University of Houston. So that is kind of like where the name of your podcast derives from. So I guess we won't have folks trying to figure out which one of you is Scott and which one of you is Holman, since it's Sam and Dustin, right?
Yes. If we had a nickel for every time someone asked which one of us was Scott, or just replied to one of our emails saying Scott, even after one of us says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from the Scott Holman Podcast," has happened a time or three.
No doubt. So let's talk about the Cougs for 2019, and they made a big splash with a coaching hire. Dana Holgerson from West Virginia, and kind of a different scenario. Typically, the coaches from the G5 go to the P5, not the other way around, but the Houston community's got to be pretty excited about having Holgerson back, the one-time assistant.
Yeah, this was the G5 to the P5 was something we experienced, I think, 3 times in a 9-year stretch, from Art Browse going to Baylor in 2007 to Tom Herman going to the Cow College in Austin in 2016. So we were very happy to be on the other side of the equation, being the team that takes the coach from the P5 as opposed to getting the coach warmed up for another more resource-rich school.
And it's hard to overstate just the night and day difference, given, just considering the fan base's feeling about the coaching situation, going from just everyone going, I can't believe we're going to have another third year of Major Applewhite. This is going to be such a bummer, to just the crazy excitement of hiring Dana Holgerson, who, as you mentioned, Jeff, is someone that's been around the program before, did a fantastic job first time around as offensive coordinator, and bringing a lot of excitement with him back to the program.
So what didn't work with Major Applewhite?
I think what didn't work was that he got hired in the first place. He was, I would say, of the 4 major candidates for the job, Applewhite, Todd Orlando, Les Miles, and Lane Kiffin, who were all to varying degrees candidates for the Cougar job when Tom Herman left. Applewhite was certainly the 4th out of 4 on everyone's list who didn't have Applewhite in their last name. He was a surprising hire at the time, and the subsequent on-field results didn't do anything to persuade anyone who had doubts, and certainly didn't do anything to persuade people who said, okay, well, let's give this guy a chance. The offense was unimaginative, which was a critique of Applewhite when he was an offensive coordinator. The recruiting results weren't really anything special. We saw the program backslide in every quantifiable way from when Tom Herman was here. And that was the main selling point for Applewhite coming in the first place, was continuity, that he was going to do all the same things that Tom Herman did so successfully in his brief tenure. It was just basically all the stuff that we found kind of annoying about Herman, later on, the unimaginative offense, the, coach speak and whatnot, and none of the big wins.
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to look at with Applewhite is how badly he whiffed on his coordinator hires generally. He brought in Brian Johnson to be his offensive coordinator for the first year. That was a failure. He did not do a good job here. Brought in Mark D'Onofrio, left him for both years as defensive coordinator. He did not do a very good job, given that he was gifted a talent like Ed Oliver's, didn't do much with the defense around him. And of course, obviously, this past year, brought in Kendall Briles as offensive coordinator. And while the on-field results were certainly pretty good, and Kendall Briles obviously on field knows what he's doing. It wasn't like he went out and found a brilliant offensive mind in Kendall Briles. He was just the coach that was willing to hold his nose and hire a Briles and put that on his program. So really none of his coordinator hires came out very well. And as Sam said, he really was an unimaginative offensive coordinator before that. So the only way he was ever going to succeed is if he was able to become a CEO type head coach and make good hires. And obviously I just couldn't do that.
Well, Dana Holgorsen has coached a lot of good quarterbacks at West Virginia, and he's got to be licking his chops with the likes of the talent of De'Aaron King.
Yeah, De'Aaron King is, I would say, the most talented quarterback in this league, which obviously is quite a statement because the AAC usually does very well for itself at the quarterback position. There's a lot of explosive offenses, usually 2 or 3 quarterbacks that would be good in any league in college football. And to put De'Aaron King at the top of this league, I don't think it's just me putting on my Houston Homer goggles. I really do think he's the total package at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if you compare Cougars to Cougars and just look at the history of quarterbacks this past decade that the Cougars have had, from Case Keenum, at the beginning of the decade, and then Greg Ward in between, and now De'Aaron King now. I mean, I'm not going to say he's better than any of those guys, but I'd put him absolutely. He's in there in the conversation with either of those guys in terms of the throws he can make. I mean, in terms of the throws he can make, he might be number one. I think I would probably comfortably put him ahead of both of those guys in terms of just the arm talent, the throws he can make, and then obviously, if you know De'Aaron King at all, you probably see some of his highlight reel runs as well. So getting him, working with an offensive mind like Dana Holgorsen has got all of Cougar Nation licking their chops, I think.
And I would say the asterisk of me saying he's by far the number one quarterback in the league is that if Mackenzie Milton was healthy, I would probably say it's 1A and 1B.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty good assessment there for sure. So how is he recovering from his knee injury from last season?
Every indication is that he's doing well. Every quote coming from out of Derek and from other coaching staff is that things are progressing and that he's been comfortable and he's gotten out there for practice and taken some reps. And according to the coaching staff, I mean, although they have, as a rule, the staff has been keeping a pretty tight lid on most things practice-wise. It certainly sounds like they're optimistic that he'll be ready to go and be 100% heading into fall camp and heading into the upcoming season.
And obviously, Dana Holgorsen is also inheriting a team that is not void of talent on the offensive side of the ball. Who will be the other playmakers you expect to step up in 2019?
I think Marquez Stevenson, who was quite good last year in the Kendall Briles offense, was just great as a deep threat. And one of the things the Cougar offense did last year was take an absurd amount of deep shots. I think what Holgorsen does offensively will be slightly different, but I still don't think we're going to stop seeing the offense being fairly vertical when you have someone with De'Aaron King's arm talent, someone with the raw speed of Stevenson, who is just, he finally had a full season being healthy because he was a good recruit, but he missed most of his first 2 years on campus due to various injuries. And I think even though the offense is a bit more complex and will look a bit different than what it was last year under Kendall Briles, I still think Stevenson will put up gaudy numbers. And I think the only other guy I'd mention, I'll let Dustin take it from here, is I think Patrick Carr, who was our leading running back last year, is going to be great in the Holgorsen offense. I think I've seen from West Virginia, Holgorsen likes to use the running back in the pass game, and I think that's something well suited to Carr's skill set, and I think he's going to be an all-purpose monster in this offense.
Yeah, I'm just very excited generally about the wide receiver depth that the Cougars have. A year ago, heading into last season, the top returning receiver for the team was De'Aaron King, who had played some wide receiver the year before. So last year is just very much a new, a lot of talented recruits in the wide receivers room that hadn't really shown it on the field yet. Marquez Stevenson, who Sam mentioned. Courtney Lark was another guy at wide receiver who had a really, really impressive season, really stepped up and showed that he could be a star receiver as well. Just a really exciting wide receiver group. And then Sam mentioned Patrick Carr had a breakout season at running back. And then the Cougars also added a transfer, Kyle Porter from UT Austin, who was immediately eligible. It's going to continue to add some depth in the running back position as well. So it's exciting, what the offense can do, not just for King, but certainly for, the team. Not only did they not really lose any skill position players offensively, they added some in Porter as well. So every reason to be excited about this offense if you're a Cougar fan.
What is the prognosis on the defensive side of the ball? The defensive line is pretty much going to be entirely replaced, and you lose the great Ed Oliver in that process. Now, I guess towards the end of the season, they weren't playing much anyway. So what's the prognosis there?
I think the Cougar fan base, and I can speak for myself personally, was pretty happy with the coordinator hire Holgorsen made. He brought in Joe Cawthon from Arkansas State, who was pretty consistently, I'd say his defenses were pretty consistent at creating pressure, going after opposing quarterbacks, creating turnovers, creating negative plays. And that was something we saw really very infrequently with the last defense. It wasn't just that they were giving up lots of yards and giving up lots of points. It's just you didn't see that many turnovers. You didn't see that many negative plays created. It was a defense that was just horrific at getting opposing offenses off the field. I believe the Cougar defense faced more plays than anyone in the country last year, which is somewhat due to the fact that we played with a breakneck tempo on offense last year, which I think won't be the case as much this year. But I think some of it was just the defense just not being able to get itself off the field. And so they made a good coordinator hire and really aggressively pursued junior college players and transfers, especially in the back end. I think we brought nearly 10 new defensive backs in that were either players from other colleges. I think Jordan Moore from Texas A&M, who was a 4-star recruit, Tabo Mwaniki, who played a bunch his first 2 years at Oklahoma State, a couple junior college All-Americans, Gervarius Owens and Demarion Williams. So the staff really made it clear with their recruiting that they were pretty horrified with the depth and talent on defense when they got in, and have pretty much used basically all of their transfer and JUCO slots on going after defensive players to try and make this a passable defensive unit now, because quite frankly, I don't know what Major Applewhite would have done if he had a third year here. There was just not very much returning from a not very good defense.
Yeah, I think the question really looking around is what kind of pieces do you have that can be part of a good defense? And I think there's a couple defensive ends and Isaiah Chambers and Peyton Turner coming back who have the potential to be pretty good. A couple of safeties that we were pretty happy with by the end of the year, Deontay Anderson and Sam, who
Gleason Sprewell.
Thank you very much.
Gleason Sprewell, I'm sorry for not mentioning him. He's a dynamo. He's one of the few guys on last year's defense that actually turned the ball over and created negative plays.
But not a lot of other guys coming back that you really think had shown you anything to make you believe that they could be a Division I starter on a good team on a potentially, conference championship contending team is what Houston hopes to be this year, which is why you saw them, as Sam said, just hit the transfer market hard. And that's why I think the story of the defense this year, and I don't think anyone's expecting it to be the best defense in the conference, or probably even in the top half of defenses in the conference. But kind of like Sam said, we just need the defense to occasionally create turnovers, to occasionally create negative plays, to occasionally get off the field, and basically just at least occasionally, do something to give the offense some help. Because I think it's pretty clear the Cougars are going to score some points, especially if De'Aaron King stays healthy. But whether the defense can be at least mediocre or below average as opposed to the disaster it was by the end of last year when Ed Oliver comes out, that's going to be, there's a couple transfers on the defensive line, there's a transfer in the linebacking core. We could run almost entirely a new starting secondary out of defensive back transfers, a couple JUCO All-Americans, as Sam said, and some other guys coming in, Jordan Moore from Texas, Colin Samuel from UCLA. So just tons and tons of transfers, and how well Joe Cawthon is able to kind of get everyone on the same page to start the year is going to be the question of, I think, whether the Cougs are, a 7-8 win team that finishes second or third in the West, or a team that has a real chance to win the West and even win the conference.
Well, one of the questions I am asking all my guests doing these previews of all the AAC teams is, who do you think will take the conference? And you certainly have a team that could be a contender for that.
I think we'll have different answers, so we'll each give our my heart. I believe there is a path to Houston winning the West. And I don't believe it's unrealistic for Houston to be the team that comes out of the West. But were I a betting man, I would say Memphis out of the West, and UCF out of the East. And I think Memphis is going to
way to go out on a limb there, Sam, and pick the favorites.
But I think Memphis takes the league this year just based on what they have returning, just based on the fact that Mackenzie Milton is not playing for UCF this year. Just everything Memphis has, I think, will add up to enough for them to win the league, which I hope I'm wrong about because I think very little of Memphis personally.
I'm going a little dark horsey. My pick this year is Cincinnati. I was really impressed with them last year. They won 11 games with an offense that still had a freshman quarterback and was really struggling to find its footing, and have just about everyone coming back from that team. So I think they're probably going to get the offense figured out a little bit more, continue to have depth built up by how well they've been recruiting up there in Cincinnati. And I think the Bearcats come out of the East and win the conference this year.
I think two of the best three teams are right there at the top of the East, Cincy and UCF. I think pretty highly of Cincy as well.
So now Houston is how is the Cougars gaining traction on the football side of things? Obviously in Texas, there's Texas A&M get a lot of the ink. Is Houston making progress in that area?
I think the fact that they hired Dana Holgorsen is certainly getting Houston some ink this offseason. And just I think because it's such a big story around these parts, if you asked every writer kind of their association with Houston, it's probably been kind of an incubator of the next big in-state school coach because the evidence is there. Someone at A&M didn't end great, but he still had Manziel in the Heisman year there. Herman and the Cal College, unfortunately, the earlier turns on that look pretty good. And Baylor was a good run for Briles until the off-field stuff obviously derailed him. And this just, I think, really is such a change of the paradigm that U of H is the school doing the poaching. U of H is the school that's become this coach's destination. And I think it's such a different thing from what people in this part of the country are used to. It's kind of getting some, turned heads like, ooh, you see Houston paid that much for Dana Holgorsen? I like to tell the story. Dustin and I live in a little college town just outside of Austin. And I think a couple days after they hired Holgorsen, we were sitting around at halftime. Both of us were wearing different pieces of Houston gear. And a guy from that college, Texas State, just a fan, was like, did you guys really hire Holgorsen? He was, I had a guy in the checkout line ask me, did you guys, really take West Virginia's coach? So it's getting me out here in Central Texas more U of H attention than I've ever gotten previously. So that's kind of my little anecdotal difference.
Yeah, I mean, if we're being honest, until the day that Sam and I die and we'll be on probably the number one and number two, teams that are taking up the most oxygen in the state of Texas are probably going to be UT Austin and Texas A&M, but neither of them is really doing anything so world, breaking right now that it's just sucking up all of the oxygen, and that is leaving plenty of room for other programs in the state to make a name for themselves. A&M obviously having a hard time breaking the top three or so of the SEC West, and UT obviously until recently they're starting to get back kind of in the Big 12 race, but have been out of it for a while. So I think that is making some room for Houston, and it's never going to replace the Longhorns, if we're being honest, as the number one program that the state is interested in if you're just looking at sheer numbers, but definitely room to make a name for themselves right now. And we're seeing, I think, the coaching staff take full advantage of that.
Well, Sam and Dustin, tell us about your podcast for those who aren't aware, and where they can follow you on social media.
Yeah, so we are a weekly year-round podcast. We cover University of Houston athletics, and then obviously we talk about the rest of the conference as well. And if you are just not a fan of the Cougars, which presumably most of the fans at home listening probably UCF fans, we do want to say, however, we've recently been putting on an event that we've really had a lot of fun with. It's a college athletics trivia tournament that we've been hosting with some of our friends from around the college sports media blogosphere. And so if you look at our current feed, Scott Holman Pawdcast, wherever you get podcasts, search the Scott Holman Pawdcast. You'll see those last few episodes. Something for everyone, because those trivia games have been a lot of fun, and I think fans of any school appreciate those. And we do also, we are very active on Twitter. So if you're a Twitter user, you like talking AAC football, we interact quite a lot with fans of other schools in the conference. So if you follow us at SH Podcast, and we spell podcast PAWD, like Cougars have paws podcast, because we're very punny like that. Follow us on Twitter. We love talking with fellow AAC fans.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for giving us a lowdown on the Cougars for 2019.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks.
And we will have more team-by-team previews on tap for you next week. And also, again, a special thanks for Blake Blahut and the Realty One Group for coming on board to sponsor the AAC report. Great to have you on board. And for continuing coverage of UCF Knights fall camp, we'll have it all for you right here on the Knightline Sports Network. And that has a wrap for the AAC report only on the Knightline Sports Network. I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for listening.